Ray Whitaker's porch had weathered 3 hurricanes, 4 presidents, and a lifetime of sweet tea, but it had never faced a letter like this. The air in Wellington Oaks carried the lazy rustle of mid-October leaves, spinning in soft spirals before settling on the cobblestones like politely dropped handkerchiefs. Ray stepped onto the porch in his house shoes, steaming mug in hand, Boomer close behind with a huff that sounded half like a sneeze. The wood beneath Ray's feet creaked the way old porches do, protesting, but not giving. The boards had silvered over the decades, sun-bleached and honest. He ran a thumb along the banister, smoothing a groove his wife's elbow used to rest in. Boomer sniffed at a curled corner of mail wedged under the rusted tin mailbox. Ray didn't need to read the logo, he knew the pastel pink of a Wellington Oaks HOA envelope like he knew the feel of that mug in his hand. His name was printed in a font that felt overly confident, the kind usually reserved for overdue bills or political flyers. He peeled it open with one careful finger, sipping as he read. Visual Noncompliance Advisory, it said in the heading, followed by dense blocks of text. His eyes skimmed over porch railing, non-standard paint tone, excessively rustic decor. It ended with a line in bold, aesthetic standards are not optional. Ray stood still for a beat too long, then exhaled through his nose. This porch was here before HOA had a budget, he muttered, and Boomer gave an agreeable grunt, padding over to sit beside the old wicker rocker that groaned when Ray settled into it. The morning sun spilled across the slats, warming the old wood and lighting up the faded pillows in a shade of gingham that had once been red. Ray looked out over the street. Mrs. Keller waved hesitantly from across the way before retreating inside. Mr. Bender, walking his dachshund, offered a tight nod but didn't slow his pace. Ray rolled the letter and tapped it against his knee. Not even a good morning, he said under his breath, not to Boomer, not to himself, but to the air. Inside, the screen door hissed closed. Ray shuffled into the kitchen, dropping the letter on the counter beside the butter dish. He reached for the drawer under the phone and slid it open. The edges of paper and old receipts jutted at odd angles, and he pushed them aside until his fingers grazed something smooth. A photograph. He lifted it gently. His wife, Ellen, mid-laugh, her hand raised in mock scolding, her other resting on that very porch swing. He smiled, just barely. She'd have a few words for this, he said aloud, then tucked the photo back between the old church bulletins and grocery lists. His hand brushed something else, something thicker. A card. He pulled it out, stiff, ivory, embossed in deep navy, Mr. Benjamin Levin, editor, Timeless Spaces, Architectural Digest. Ray's eyes narrowed, lips pressing together not in anger, but in thought. Boomer shuffled into the room, circling twice before flopping down on a throw rug. Outside, a squirrel made a half-hearted dash across the yard. The sun shifted. Ray moved to the counter, poured himself another cup of coffee, and sat at the same kitchen table he'd shared with Ellen for 37 years. The varnish had worn away where their elbows had rested. A pale ring from an old coffee cup marked her usual spot. He took a slow sip. His gaze traveled back to the letter. Then to the porch beyond the window. Then down again. Ray looked back at the business card from Mr. Levin, editor, Timeless Spaces, A.D. In the fluorescent hum of the HOA hall, Virginia Bloom's heels clicked like punctuation, each step a statement. The chairs were already half filled by the time Ray arrived, his flannel collar turned up against the cool breeze drifting off the pumpkin patch outside. The hall smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon-scented air freshener, like someone had tried to make the place feel homey and sterile all at once. A folding table lined the front of the room, its white plastic gleaming under LED lights. A tray of sugar cookies sat untouched beside a stack of HOA pamphlets that read Preserve, Protect, Perfect. Ray nodded to Pastor John as he passed, who offered a quiet evening and a sympathetic smile. Ray found a seat near the back, settling in with a soft creak of metal and denim. Boomer, left at home, would have been happier snoozing beneath the table. Up front, Ruthie Hayes adjusted a microphone, her hands jittering slightly as she aligned papers with practiced nervousness. "We'll begin in just a moment," she murmured. Ray noticed she didn't make eye contact with him or anyone else. Then came Ginny Bloom. Her blazer was the color of overripe plums, and her pearl earrings caught the light like camera flashes. She walked with intent, each step measured, each smile slightly too rehearsed. When she reached the front, she adjusted her collar with a single, precise movement and faced the room. "Good evening, neighbors," she began, her voice syrupy and firm. "Tonight, we continue our mission to maintain the visual integrity and resale health of Wellington Oaks." Ray's eyes wandered to the row of SUVs parked neatly outside. Most looked alike, gleaming, silver or black, no bumper stickers. Ginny gestured toward a mounted screen. The lights dimmed slightly, not enough to relax anyone, but just enough to make the slideshow legible. The first slide, Fall Harmony, Aesthetic Cohesion Guidelines. "Take pride in where you live," she continued, clicking to a slide that showed neatly painted shutters and uniform planters. "Consistency is comforting. And comforting neighborhoods bring value to everyone." Ray leaned back in his chair. The next slide came up, an image of a porch, not his, but close. Gingham cushions, faded paint, wind chimes. A red circle appeared around the decor as Ginny clicked again. "Rustic elements should not distract from street continuity," she said without looking up. He didn't flinch. But a few heads turned subtly in his direction. Pastor John coughed. Lorraine looked down at her lap. Ginny moved on. Another slide. Another red circle. "As part of the proposed seasonal aesthetic enforcement policy," she continued, "we encourage adjustments that bring unity to our visual identity. While this is pending formal ratification, we ask for voluntary compliance. For now." Ray remembered Ellen, standing on their porch years ago, holding up a wind chime made from soda bottles and laughing. "The day we have to ask permission to hang a wind chime," she had said, "I'm packing up." He blinked slowly. The room was quiet but for the clicking of slides and the occasional rustle of papers. No one raised a hand. After the meeting adjourned, Ruthie caught him near the back as he reached for his coat. "Ray," she whispered, barely above a breath. "They're drafting a second notice. You'll probably get it by Tuesday." He nodded once. "Thanks for the warning." She looked like she wanted to say more, but Ginny was still nearby, her smile fixed as she accepted compliments and offered advice about proper mulch colors. As Ray turned to leave, Ginny's voice rose just enough to reach him. "Some porches invite history," she said, eyes on a nearby couple, "others invite property value loss." Outside, the sky had darkened to a deep indigo. The porch lights along the street flickered on in unison, casting a uniform glow across front lawns. Ray walked home slowly, passing Halloween decorations that all looked oddly alike, white ghosts, plastic pumpkins, tidy bales of hay bought in bulk. At home, the house was still. Boomer thumped his tail once in greeting before curling back into his blanket nest by the heater. Ray poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon, letting it settle before lifting the glass. He stared out the kitchen window, where the porch swing swayed slightly in the evening breeze. He didn't sit. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering just a second longer than usual, then pressed the contact marked Daisy, mobile. Daisy's boots tapped against her childhood porch like they were testing memory for stability. She paused before the screen door, hand resting against the frame, and looked around like a visitor trying to gauge a place that was once instinct. The porch was just as she remembered, only older, with the paint a bit more sun-faded and the swing creaking slightly even when empty. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant wood smoke, rustling the wind chimes her mother had once insisted were tuned just right. Ray opened the door before she knocked. "Didn't expect you that quick." "I drove straight through," Daisy replied, brushing wind-blown curls from her face. "Didn't want you changing your mind." Boomer lumbered forward with a sleepy bark, tail swaying in lopsided rhythm. Daisy crouched to rub behind his ears, laughing softly. "You haven't changed a bit." Ray stepped aside. "Neither has the house." Inside, the lighting was warm and forgiving. Dust caught the afternoon sun like dancing memories. The mantel still held the ceramic angel Ellen had glued back together once, and beside it, a photo of Daisy in high school, awkward smile and braces unapologetically present. Ray gestured toward the porch. They said it's outdated. Daisy set her camera bag down with a soft thud. Dad, it's called character. Let me show them. She stepped back outside with him, scanning the angles of sunlight that fell just right across the railing, the shadows that lined the chipped steps. With quiet efficiency, she began adjusting things, not altering, just refining. A folded quilt draped over the swing. A dried corn husk bundle shifted to better catch the golden light. Then she lifted the camera. Click. The edge of the rocking chair, worn smooth by decades. Click. The hook her mother used for a hanging fern. Click. The hand-carved banister post, still marked with the initials R+E, scratched in the summer of '77. Ray sat back on the swing as Boomer lay beside him, head on paws, ears flicking occasionally. He watched Daisy move with focus, the kind he recognized from Ellen when she arranged Thanksgiving tables with mismatched plates and perfect intention. She paused, raising her lens. Don't move. Click. That's it. Later, they sat at the kitchen table with plates of pulled pork and sweet corn muffins between them. The old clock above the stove ticked unevenly, and the smell of baked apples drifted faintly from a candle someone had gifted years ago. You still cook like Mom, Daisy said, pushing a fork through her beans. She taught me everything except how to cook for one, Ray replied. The quiet stretched. Not uncomfortable, just old. Familiar. Like a coat you forgot still fit. Daisy reached into her bag and pulled out her laptop. I want to send these tonight. AD's doing a feature on heritage porches for winter. I think we've got something they'd want. Ray raised an eyebrow. Architectural Digest wants a porch with crooked steps and a dented mailbox? They want story, she said, fingers moving quickly on the keyboard. And this place has story in every board. He didn't respond, but he didn't stop her either. Outside, dusk settled with long shadows. A single porch bulb flickered to life as she hit send. They moved back to the swing, bringing mugs of tea, and sat without filling the silence. The porch light cast a pool of amber around them, softening edges and turning chipped paint into texture. For the first time in too long, the air between them felt still. Morning came with the scent of damp leaves and fresh ground coffee. Daisy, hair still tousled, reached for her phone as a new email lit the screen. We love this look. Let's talk. AD. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, murmurs filled the air, and somewhere near the front, a slideshow began with a chime, visual harmony, a new standard. The scent of store-bought cinnamon candles clung thick in the air, mixing awkwardly with the tart bite of apple cider poured into plastic cups at the back of the room. A banner reading HOA Fall Update Meeting fluttered gently from a portable stand, one corner already curling from the tape's slow surrender. The Wellington Oaks Community Hall was fuller than usual, and warmer, too, not from heat but from tension that rose like steam over coffee cups. Daisy leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching it all with quiet calculation. Ray sat in the third row, feet planted, chin level. Ginny Bloom stood center stage, blazer pressed crisp, lips painted too tight. Her expression suggested the entire evening was a performance she'd rehearsed to applause. Thank you all for coming, she began, tapping a sleek remote. Tonight's presentation outlines our updated expectations for neighborhood integrity as we head into winter. We call it Visual Harmony, a new standard. Click. A slide appeared, rows of immaculate homes, matched shutters, manicured hedges. Then another. And another. Click. The fourth slide landed with the thud of recognition. Ray's porch. Circled in red. Muted gasps fluttered like moths around the room. The photo was labeled Disruption Zones, Non-Conforming Aesthetics. Ray's hand didn't flinch. But his eyes narrowed. Ginny let the silence linger. We've worked hard to cultivate a neighborhood that reflects unity and pride. Deviation, she paused, can be contagious. Daisy's brows lifted. Ray stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice. My wife planted that oak in the front yard 35 years ago. Said she wanted our porch to feel like it had its own umbrella. That swing, he gestured, she sat in it every summer until she couldn't anymore. Some days, I think it still remembers how she rocked. A pause. Some eyes dropped. Others watched. I built that porch with her father. By hand. Before the HOA had a name, or a budget, or a slide projector. Ginny folded her arms, expression unchanging. Then Lorraine Smith stood. Small-framed, hands clutching her sweater cuffs. You find me for planting petunias, she said, voice thin but steady. Said they weren't seasonal. But I planted them for my husband. They were his favorite. Pastor John shifted forward. You made me repaint my flagpole, he added. White. Said my old one was too visually aggressive. It was wood. It was the one my son made before he deployed. The silence cracked. Murmurs rose. A teenager near the back tilted his phone slightly, live streaming, lens aimed square at Ginny. Voices joined in, overlapping. A man in a baseball cap muttered about losing his wind chimes. Someone else mentioned a garden gnome incident. The community hall, once filled with careful obedience, started to breathe like it hadn't in years. Ruthie, hands shaking slightly, stepped forward and pulled a folder from her tote. This, she said, holding up a sheaf of paper, is Policy 7B, the so-called seasonal aesthetic enforcement. She flipped to the last page. It's not signed. It was never voted on. It's not binding. Gasps this time, clear, unfiltered. Ginny snatched the folder from Ruthie's hands and slammed it onto the table. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Without order, there's chaos, she shouted, then turned and grabbed the microphone. You think a few porches and petunias matter more than standards? Her hand shook as she hurled the clipboard to the floor. Papers scattered like startled birds. Someone clapped. Then another. And another. The applause swelled, awkward and real, echoing around the hall as Ginny stood frozen, jaw trembling. Behind her, the slideshow flicked again, back to Ray's porch. Daisy leaned toward her father, her voice low but sure. They just crowned you community spokesman, Dad. Ruthie's attic smelled of lemon oil and old decisions, exactly where Daisy found the folder marked HOA vendor records, confidential. Dust danced in the filtered light streaming through a single round window, catching in Daisy's throat as she knelt beside a stack of boxes labeled in faded marker. Ruthie stood at the attic hatch, holding the pull rope and shifting from foot to foot like she might change her mind about letting Daisy rummage through the paper bones of the HOA's past. Are you sure you're okay with this? Daisy asked, adjusting the bandana around her neck. Ruthie sighed. I already stayed quiet too long. The folder had been stuffed inside an old biscuit tin from a holiday cookie assortment, festive on the outside, damning within. Daisy flipped through thermal print receipts, each curling at the corners, faded but legible under the small flashlight Ray had handed her that morning. Her fingers froze on one in particular. Bloom Design Partners, she read aloud, squinting at the header. Landscape consultation, $1,475. Fall symmetry prep. She found the same name again 2 pages later. Same date. Different invoice number. Downstairs, Ray waited at the dining room table, the entire surface buried under legal pads, yellow highlighters, and an old laptop that booted with a groan. When Daisy came through the door with the tin in one hand and the folder in the other, he didn't say anything, just moved his coffee aside and cleared a space. They worked through the afternoon, the house quiet except for the tapping of keys and the occasional creak of Boomer settling into a new position by the heater vent. Outside, rain patterned the windows in soft, steady rhythms. Look at this, Daisy said, spinning the laptop toward him. Same vendor, 3 company names, 2 addresses, one of them is a P.O. box. Ray scrolled slowly, frowning. You think Ginny's related to any of them? Daisy opened another receipt. The last name's Bloom. And the account number matches this one here. She tapped the screen. That's not coincidence. He leaned back, arms crossed, eyes scanning the columns she'd color-coded. If we keep looking, we better be ready for what we find. The words had barely left his mouth when the doorbell rang. Ray opened it to find no one there. But on the doormat sat a large manila envelope. No return address. No markings. Just thick enough to matter. He brought it in, unsealed it carefully, and laid the contents on the table. A printed PDF, rubber-banded stacks of copied statements, and a sticky note in blocky writing. Use this wisely. Daisy flipped through the first few pages. These are bank statements, she whispered. 3 years' worth of HOA expenditures. Ray thumbed through until he found what he didn't want to see. $3,200, seasonal rebalancing, October, he read aloud, then dropped the sheet onto the table. They trimmed a bush and called it an opera. Daisy's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Mr. Levin. I sent him a draft summary, and he's forwarding it to someone at the paper. Ray nodded. It's time. They stayed at the table, highlighting, circling, double-checking. Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. The old clock on the wall ticked just a shade slower than the second hand. Boomer stirred. A low, quiet growl rumbled from his chest. Daisy stood, moved to the window, and peeled back the curtain just enough to see the street. A car idled across the lane. Its headlights swept slowly over the porch, lingering for a beat too long before clicking off. Boomer sua ki, on den fa o te quet ngang hien na. Ai du dang quan sat. The front page headline read like a whisper shouted loud, HOA finances under fire, cozy contracts, community concerns. Ray read it once at the kitchen table, once again at the diner, and a third time while leaning against the post of his porch. Each time, the words struck a little deeper, not just because they exposed something, but because they framed his fight in someone else's voice. And for the first time, that voice wasn't dismissive or cold. Luella Marks had gotten it right. There were no accusations, only patterns. No insults, just numbers and names, neatly lined up like a polite kind of rebellion. The article included scans of receipts, direct quotes from Ruthie Hayes, and even a side-by-side timeline showing when Policy 7B had supposedly passed versus when it had quietly started enforcing fines. Daisy had helped gather the images. Luella had brought the clarity. Ray stirred sugar into his coffee at the maple skillet, listening to the hush settle over the morning crowd. A few patrons nodded his way. Shelley poured without asking. 2 folks already brought in their own copies, she murmured. You want me to autograph yours? He chuckled but didn't answer. Outside, the community board by the bus stop now held a copy of the article pinned dead center, a neon pink sticky note above it, Town Hall hearing, December 4th, you're invited. Back home, the table was still blanketed in documents, highlighters, and paper clips. Daisy had organized everything into 3 binders, each labeled in careful handwriting. Ray picked one up just as the mail arrived. Among the circulars and early Christmas cards was a crisp envelope stamped with the city's seal. Summons? Daisy asked. He opened it slowly. Invitation. They want me to speak. 2 days later, Ginny appeared on local TV, polished as ever in a navy blazer, speaking softly from a manicured garden backdrop. Her words were smooth, practiced. We've always prioritized community aesthetics. I believe that order brings peace. But her eyes, Ray noticed, told a different story. The town hall hearing was held in the community gym, with metal chairs that scraped loudly on the polished floor and a makeshift podium under a spotlight meant more for basketball games than civic drama. The room filled slowly at first, then suddenly. Ruthie sat near the front, flanked by Pastor John and Mr. Bender. Luella stood off to the side, notebook in hand, no camera, just a pen. Ray stepped up to the podium when called, clearing his throat once. I won't take much of your time, he began. I've lived here 40 years. Built my porch with help from my father-in-law, sanded every rail myself. My wife Ellen, she picked out the swing. Sat there most evenings, even the cold ones, wrapped in a blanket with Boomer at her feet. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. I thought porches were for stories. Turns out, mine carried a ledger too. The silence was respectful. Thoughtful. Lorraine stood, holding a small paper. Her voice was shaky but sure. I wrote something, she said. Just short. She unfolded the page. Porches are our front row seats to memory. Where wind knows our names. Where light stays longer because someone we loved once laughed there. No one clapped. But no one breathed either. Ginny rose abruptly, face flushed. This town was chaos before me, she shouted, voice cracking. I made it beautiful. I gave it rules. Without rules, we have weeds and mailboxes shaped like cows and... Her voice faltered. She choked once, then again, and someone, maybe Ruthie, reached out to steady her. She didn't resist. Just slumped slightly, mascara smudging, as she was led away from the podium. There was no applause. Back home, Ray sat on the porch again. The wind was sharper now, but not unpleasant. Daisy joined him with 2 mugs, steam curling from the rims. She handed him an envelope. From the mayor's office, she said. You'll want to read this. Ray hammered the final nail into the cedar sign just as the first guest arrived. It read, Porch Festival today, sit a while, share a story. The crisp December air carried the sweet scent of apple cider and cinnamon rolls, and laughter skipped across the front yards like birds flitting between feeders. Children in red knit caps ran past the rows of folding chairs lining the sidewalks, their boots kicking up stray leaves that hadn't quite surrendered to winter. From a small stage on the corner, a trio of young musicians strummed a gentle rendition of Take Me Home, Country Roads, the lyrics carried soft and low over the speakers. Ray stepped back from the sign and took it in for a moment, cedar polished with linseed oil, hand-lettered in Daisy's careful script. The porch behind him wore garlands of dried orange slices and pine cones, and Boomer had already claimed his spot by the rocker, watching each guest like a well-trained usher. Neighbors arrived one by one, some bearing pies, others with folding stools tucked under their arms. Lorraine brought elderberry jam in a mason jar, Ruthie handed out cider in cups with cinnamon sticks bobbing inside, and Mr. Bender, newly bold in his retirement, passed out hand warmers from a cardboard box labeled Leftover from '06 Snow Week. Ray moved among them, quiet but steady, his flannel tucked neatly under a wool cardigan. Daisy stayed near the table set with preserves and printed programs, answering questions about the porch's history with a warmth that turned curiosity into admiration. Luella arrived mid-morning, notepad in one hand, thermos in the other. I came as a guest, she told Ray, not a reporter. But I'll take good notes, just in case. By noon, a representative from the city stepped onto the porch. She held out a certificate bordered in gold leaf, designated cultural landmark, Whitaker Porch, EST 1987. Ray blinked once, then took it with both hands. Ellen would have made me hang this crooked, just to keep it humble, he said. Daisy laughed, then turned serious. She held up a second envelope, this one with a wax seal. I got in, she said. Savannah Institute. Full scholarship. Public Heritage Design. Ray didn't answer at first. He only pulled her into a one-armed hug and nodded, voice caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. Later, as the sun tipped toward the pines and the music drifted into softer notes, an impromptu ceremony began. Children gathered near the porch steps, cued more by instinct than instruction. Ray cleared his throat. There used to be a rule in this neighborhood, he said. Keep your porch tidy. Keep your life private. But this porch, he glanced around, was never just mine. It belonged to anyone who needed a place to sit a while. He reached behind him and lifted a small wooden plaque from under the swing. With quiet care, he affixed it to the wall beside the front door, just beneath the wind chime Ellen had once tuned to A D major. The carved letters caught the late light. Preserved by memory. Protected by love. The crowd stood still for a beat. Then someone started clapping. A ripple, then a wave. Ray nodded once, not needing words. As twilight deepened, Kids settled around him on quilts and sleeping bags, asking about the porch's first paint color, about Ellen, about the carved initials on the railing. Ray answered each one, slow and steady, the cadence of a man used to telling the same stories because they still mattered. The sky darkened into that deep December blue, not yet black, and Boomer curled by the rocker. Ray raised his coffee to the winter sky and said softly, "She'd have liked today." On a quiet December afternoon, neighbors gathered not to complain, but to remember, to laugh, and to sit a while. What began as a fight over a porch became a gentle revolution, one that turned silence into courage and rules into conversation. When power forgets its place, community has a way of reminding it, through memory, truth, and a little bit of stubborn love. Like a lantern left glowing in the window, one steady act of resistance can light the way home for everyone. Perhaps it's never too late to pull up a chair, listen closely, and protect what matters, together.